Today, we're going to consider the inaugural East-West All-Star Game, which took place on September 10th, 1933, exactly 90 years ago tomorrow. We'll begin by taking a quick look at the year 1933. Why are you not? It's the height of the Great Depression. 25% of the American workforce is unemployed, nearly 13 million people. Franklin Roosevelt was inaugurated that year as president and enacted a series of economic recovery programs known as the New Deal. But the sad reality for millions of Americans was bread lines and soup kitchens. A well-needed dose of hope and optimism was provided that summer by the Chicago World's Fair, celebrating the 100th anniversary of that city's founding and offering a vision, as one observer described, of a happier, not too distant future driven by innovation in science and technology. 133 pavilions and exhibits were constructed on a 3.5-mile stretch along the shore of Lake Michigan for an exhibition which attracted over 48 million visitors during its extended 2-year run. The fair introduced the world to, among other things, Miracle Whip, new building materials, and sports all-star games. Full confession, I love World's Fairs. I attended the 1965 New York World's Fair shortly before starting kindergarten, and it remains one of my foundational experiences. So please indulge me while we stroll about the fairgrounds a little. There was a lot of futuristic architecture on display in the theme exhibits, like the Hall of Science pictured here, or the Horticulture Building. There were corporate exhibitors like Chrysler, whose impressive structure was even as absolutely gorgeous at night. In fact, the whole fairgrounds became a fanciful explosion of light and color after dark. There were several international exhibits, like the popular Belgian Village. Curiously, this was one of the few structures on the grounds to feature windows, which were absent from most of the buildings. There was a popular midway with rides and games and sideshow attractions, including, oddly enough, infant incubators with living babies. I have to mention that Sinclair Gasoline had an exhibit of life-size dinosaurs. They sponsored a similar exhibit at the New York Fair 32 years later, much to the delight of 4-year-old me. Perhaps the most popular feature was the Sky Ride, which afforded spectacular views of the grounds. And as I mentioned, another feature of the World's Fair was sports, and specifically all-star games. Baseball's inaugural all-star game was played in Chicago that summer in conjunction with the fair. The all-star game was the brainchild of Chicago Tribune sports editor Arch Ward. His pitch to MLB executives was enthusiastically received, and the contest quickly organized for July 6th at Comiskey Park, home of the White Sox. The starters were selected by a vote of the fans, with the reserves chosen by the managers. The National League roster featured future Hall of Famers Bill Terry, Carl Hubbell, Frankie Frisch, Chuck Klein, and Gabby Hartnett. The recently retired John McGraw managed the Nationals, who wore specially designed uniforms for the occasion. This was quickly recognized as a terrible idea, and it would be another 88 years before Major League Baseball would forget this obvious lesson. The American League squad, managed by the venerable Connie Mack and quite properly wearing their own team's uniforms, was headlined by the biggest name in the sport, Babe Ruth. Lou Gehrig, Jimmy Fox, Lefty Grove, Bill Dickey, and Charlie Gehringer were some of the other immortals on the squad. The Americans prevailed 4-2 behind the pitching of lefties Gomez and Grove. Highlight of the game was the first all-star home run, appropriately hit by the Bambino, a 2-run shot in the bottom of the third. The contest was originally planned as a one-off special World's Fair event, but it was so successful that baseball soon announced it would be held annually, and it remains a midsummer tradition and a highlight of every season. There was also an East-West College All-Star game held at Soldier Field in late August in conjunction with the fair, the forerunner of the College All-Star game held annually at Soldier Field from 1934 to 1976. Now, it was against this backdrop that two Black sports writers, Roy Sparrow of the Pittsburgh Sun-Telegraph and William Nunn of the Pittsburgh Courier, proposed a Negro League All-Star game. That's Sparrow on the left. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a photo of William Nunn Sr. There are plenty of photos of his son, William Nunn Jr., who's enshrined in the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton for his contributions as a sports writer and later as a pioneering scout who was instrumental in exposing the National Football League to the long-neglected talent playing in historically Black colleges and universities. And you might be familiar with his son, the late William Nunn III, whose many film credits include the role of Radio Raheem in Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. So Roy Sparrow and Radio Raheem's grandfather pitched their idea to Pittsburgh Crawford's owner, Gus Greenlee, who referred the pair to Chicago American Giants owner Robert A. Cole. Cole used his local connections to secure Comiskey Park for the event, which was scheduled for September 10th. The World's Fair may have been the impetus, but Chicago was the ideal location for a gathering of Black baseball, centrally located and easily accessible by train from all parts of the country. Black newspapers with national distribution like the Pittsburgh Courier and Chicago Defender spread the word and invited fans to vote for the players who would represent the East and West in the Classic. I'd like you to take a moment to consider this simple write-in ballot that was published in Black newspapers coast to coast. And think about the Black population in the 1930s, marginalized and ignored, and all too often institutionally disenfranchised. What must it have meant for them to be invited to cast a vote, to be told their opinion mattered? Even if it was just to select players in a baseball game, it must have been very empowering for them to be offered this opportunity. And tens of thousands of fans voted from all over the country, with running tabulations printed each week. Here are the final vote totals as published the day before the big game. Now let's take a look at the two squads the fans selected. The East team was managed by the legendary John Henry Lloyd. His assistant was Nate Harris, who started for several Chicago teams in the early part of the century, most notably the Leland Giants. Hitting first and playing center field, probably the best leadoff man of his generation and one of the greatest ever, James Cool Papa Bell of the Pittsburgh Crawfords. Cool Papa is part of a Black baseball legacy of speed demons that extends from Spotswood Poll through to Rickey Henderson and beyond. But to the white contemporaries who played against him, Bell was a unicorn, utilizing speed as a weapon in a way that had essentially disappeared from Major League Baseball by the mid-1930s. Batting second and playing right field, I don't know if you've heard of this guy, Herbert Rat Dixon of the Philadelphia Stars. Dixon was nearing the end of a dominant run as one of the most dangerous hitters in blackball. Besides that bat, he provided gold glove defense in right and possessed a rifle arm. Over the 6-year span, 1928 to 1933, Rat Dixon ranks fourth in blackball in wins above replacement, behind Hall of Famers Willie Wells, Satchel Paige, and Turkey Stearns. Batting third, first baseman Oscar Charleston of the Pittsburgh Crawfords. The great Charleston was 36 years old, and it showed in some aspects of his game. It had been 4 years since Oscar played in the outfield, and he rarely stole bases anymore, but the man could still hit. In 1933, he led the Negro National League in runs scored, finished second in homers and RBIs, and had an OPS over 1,000. More importantly, he was the people's choice, leading all vote getters in the All-Star balloting with 43,793. Batting fourth, a sentimental pick of the fans, catcher Biz Mackey of the Philadelphia Stars. The 35-year-old was still a solid player, but there was another catcher in the East making a much bigger impression. But Mackey had been one of blackball's best-loved stars for over a decade, and that earned him the starting berth behind the plate. Batting fifth, third baseman Ernest Judson Wilson of the Philadelphia Stars. It's strange to think that Judd Wilson was already 37 years old in 1933 because he would play another 12 years in the Negro Leagues, consistently knocking the crap out of the ball deep into his 40s. Batting sixth, the shortstop, Dick Lundy, also of the Philadelphia Stars. King Richard was in his 18th season of top-level blackball, and while his batting had fallen off from its once lofty heights, he was still a skilled and graceful defender at short. Batting seventh in left field, Vic Harris of the Homestead Grays. Harris is best known as the manager of Homestead's long gray line of pennant winners beginning in 1937. But in his prime, he was a heck of a ball player, a speedy 300 hitter with line drive power, possessing, as you would expect from a future managing legend, a sharp mind for the game. I'd like to point out that 5 of the first 7 men in this batting order are in the Hall of Fame, and for my money, the other 2 really belong there as well. Batting eighth, another veteran, second baseman John Henry Russell of the Pittsburgh Crawfords. The longtime St. Louis Star was never much of a hitter, but is one of blackball's best defensive second basemen ever. His defensive metrics on the Seamheads website place him in the 100th percentile of second basemen, and he ranks third all-time in defensive runs saved, behind 2 better-known stars, Bingo DeMoss and Newt Allen. Batting ninth, the starting pitcher for the East, Sam Streeter of the Pittsburgh Crawfords. A left-handed spitball artist, Streeter had been one of blackball's leading pitchers since the mid-20s, mostly with the Birmingham Black Barons. According to Seamheads, Streeter is the 4th winningest southpaw in Negro League history, behind only Willie Foster, Andy Cooper, and Nip Winters. On the bench for the East was the catcher who was having a better year than Biz Mackey, 21-year-old Josh Gibson of the Pittsburgh Crawfords. Josh is only in his 4th season, and he's already a legend, hitting home runs further and more frequently than anyone had ever seen. Statistically, he was the best hitter in black baseball in 1933, as he would continue to be for many years to come. Also on the bench for the East were Hall of Fame third baseman Judy Johnson of the Pittsburgh Crawfords, New York Black Yankees center fielder Clarence Fats Jenkins, a member of the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, and hard-hitting right fielder Ted Page of the Crawfords. On the East pitching staff, the incomparable Leroy Satchel Page of the Pittsburgh Crawfords. Now, you're probably asking yourself, why is Satchel in the bullpen rather than starting this game? If we're to believe the vote totals that were released to the public, it's because he finished 3rd in the voting. But it strains credibility to think that the most famous black ball player in the country placed thousands of votes behind Sam Streeter and Chippy Britt in a popularity contest. The fact of the matter is that Satchel Paige jumped the Crawfords that summer to play for a white semi-pro team in Bismarck, South Dakota, and was over 800 miles away from Comiskey Park on that afternoon. We can only surmise that Page was the runaway vote leader amongst pitchers and maybe amongst everybody, but realizing he'd be a no-show, the organizers fudged the totals to spare themselves embarrassment. Left-hander Leroy Matlock of the Crawfords was the best pitcher in the Negro National League in 1933, according to the stats at Seamheads. A curveballer with excellent control, Matlock was a pennant winner with the St. Louis Stars before relocating to Pittsburgh, first with the Grays and then with the Craws. He would go undefeated in 1935 for that legendary Crawfords pennant winner. Bert Buffalo Hunter was another Pittsburgh Crawford curveball specialist who had won a pennant with the St. Louis Stars. Hunter was probably the best pitcher in the short-lived East-West League in 1932 and would lead the NNL in wins in 33. He split that season between the Craws and the Akron Grays, a league team for just a few weeks early in the season. The Homestead Grays' George Chippy Britt was the only pitcher on the East roster who didn't play for the Pittsburgh Crawfords. The 37-year-old was in his 16th year in big-time blackball. Now on to the West. Managing the West All-Stars was the great Candy Jim Taylor, who managed more games than anyone in Negro League history. His coaches were Joe Green, a longtime fixture in the Chicago blackball scene, most notably as an outfielder and manager of the original Chicago Giants, and Jim Brown, who won multiple pennants in the 20s with the American Giants. Before we look at the West squad, we need to consider a few no-shows. American Giants outfielder Nat Rogers was selected to start, but missed the game, I believe due to injury. And 3 members of the Kansas City Monarchs were selected for the game. Second baseman Newt Allen, two-way Hall of Famer Bullet Rogan, and catcher T.J. Young. The Monarchs were not league members, preferring to make their living barnstorming against white competition, and their owner, J.L. Wilkinson, chose not to release any of their players for this contest. Leading off for the West and playing center field, the great Norman Turkey Stearns of the Chicago American Giants. Stearns had been a terrific middle-of-the-lineup slugger with the Detroit Stars earlier in his career, but American Giants manager Dave Malarcher chose to diversify Turkey's game by employing him as a leadoff hitter. And Stearns made the transition brilliantly, continuing to rank among the best hitters in blackball, despite mashing fewer home runs. Batting second, American Giants shortstop Willie the Devil Wells. The Oklahoma native was a great hitter, brilliant defender, the best black shortstop of his generation, and is a very worthy member of the Baseball Hall of Fame. Batting third, American Giants left fielder Walter Steel Arm Davis, a former pitcher who didn't stick in the Negro Leagues until he was 31 years old, but was one of blackball's heaviest hitters for several years. He was selected to start in this game at the age of 37. Batting cleanup, third baseman Alex Radcliffe of Chicago. He's less well known than his brother Ted, the famous double-duty Radcliffe, who sometimes pitched and caught in the same game. But Alex may have been a better ball player, and he's starting here in his first of 11 East-West Classics. First baseman George Mule Suttles is our 5th straight Chicago American Giant at the top of the West batting order. The fearsome slugger ranks second all-time in home run percentage, behind only Josh Gibson. Fans would yell, "Kick Mule," when he came to the plate, and the Chicago defender was fond of referring to Suttles as the Black Babe Ruth. Finally, a non-American Giant in the starting lineup, young Leroy Morney, a Columbus, Ohio native who started the season with the Columbus Bluebirds and represented their league replacements, the very short-lived Cleveland Giants, in this East-West game. Morney was the #2 vote getter at shortstop behind Willie Wells and replaced Kansas City's Newt Allen as the West starter at second base. The youngest starter in the inaugural East-West game was the dynamic 22-year-old Sam Bankhead of the Nashville Elite Giants, the replacement for Nat Rogers. Bankhead was a versatile performer who could play all over the infield or outfield and started in right field in this contest. He would later shine as shortstop for the Homestead Grays dynasty of the 40s. Batting 8th and catching, veteran backstop Larry Brown of the American Giants, who spent most of his years starring for the Memphis Red Sox, who he later managed. Batting 9th and pitching, Willie Foster, ace left-hander of the American Giants, leading vote getter for the West squad, and arguably the greatest southpaw in blackball history. On the bench was young American Giant second baseman Boise Jack Marshall. and catcher Tommy Dukes of the Nashville Elite Giants. Featuring in the West's frankly unimpressive bullpen was Chicago's Willie Shug Cornelius, Jim Cannonball Willis of Nashville, and Nashville's Percy Bailey, an enigmatic figure credited with just 2 seasons of big-time blackball, but selected as an all-star in his rookie campaign. Now that we have all of that context behind us, let's go to Comiskey Park for that first East-West All-Star Classic. It's Sunday, September 10th, and drizzling in Chicago. It would rain on and off all afternoon, resulting in lower than expected box office figures. The starting pitchers are Sam Streeter of Pittsburgh for the East and Chicago's Willie Foster for the West. It's not often you find action photography in the black newspapers in the 30s, and rarer still that those images survive transfers to microfilm and then digital intact. But here's a beautiful shot from the Chicago Defender of the first batter in East-West game history, Cool Papa Bell, lining out to left fielder Steel Arm Davis. The first hit in East-West game history was a sharply stroked single to left by Judd Wilson off Foster in the second. Bottom of the third, Sam Bankhead beat out an infield grounder, was bunted to second by Larry Brown, and scored the game's first run on Turkey Stern's single to right. Top of the fourth, Rap Dixon led off with a walk. Then Foster hit Oscar Charleston with a pitch to put 2 on with none out. Biz Mackey struck out while Dixon and Charleston pulled off a double steal, advancing to second and third. Judd Wilson hit a ground ball to Leroy Morney. The second baseman threw home to try and get Dixon, but his low throw eluded West catcher Larry Brown. Dixon and Charleston both scored to give the East the lead while Wilson took second on the error. And here's Oscar Charleston avoiding catcher Brown to score that second run. Dick Lundy walked, then Morney committed his second error of the inning, misplaying Vic Harris's grounder to load the bases. John Henry Russell brought home the East's third run with a perfect squeeze bunt back to the pitcher. For the East, 3 runs on no hits, 2 errors, and 2 left. In the middle of the fourth, the East leads 3-1. Bottom of the fourth, Willie Wells and American Giants teammate Steel Arm Davis opened the frame with back-to-back doubles to left, cutting the East's lead to 3-2. 2 batters later, slugger Mule Suttles launched the first ever East-West game home run to put the West back on top 4-3. Alongside a print of Mule Suttles I made several years ago is the Courier's description of the moment. 230 pounds of solid bone and muscle, with his knock-knees carrying his huge frame along, and with the biggest bat on the field being carried as though it were a toothpick, Mule advanced to the plate. What an ovation he got, because Mule, to colored fandom, is what Ruth is to Major League Baseball. Streeter carried one through the letters for a strike. The next ball was to his liking. With hardly any effort, he swung. Like a bullet from a rifle, the ball sped out into deep left center. There was power to the drive. Cool Papa Bell started to run. Suddenly he stopped. Pandemonium reigned. Straw hats filled the air. The noise reminded one of machine gun fire, which on occasion rocked Chicago in its halcyon days. For the Mule had tagged one on the nose. Way up in the upper tier of the left center field stands, the ball landed and bounced along as 100 fans scrambled madly for the honor of getting the ball. It was the kind of swat which is worth the price of admission any day. Top of the fifth, with 1 out, Rap Dixon dropped a perfect bunt down the third baseline for a base hit. Then Oscar Charleston was hit by a Willie Foster pitch for the second time in the game, and there were once again runners on first and second. Biz Mackey lifted a Texas League single to center, and the East had the bases loaded with 1 out. Judd Boojum Wilson singled to left center to drive in Dixon and Charleston, and the East went ahead 5-4. They thought they'd added another run on a Dick Lundy sacrifice fly to right, but the West appealed that Biz Mackey left third too early. The umpires agreed, and the sac fly turned into an inning-ending double play. Through 4.5, the East leads the West 5-4. Bottom of the fifth, Chicago catcher Larry Brown led off the inning with a long drive to the deepest reaches of center field. Brown sped around the bases while Cool Papa Bell gave chase. As Bell was throwing his relay to shortstop Dick Lundy, third base coach Jim Brown waved batter Larry Brown home. Lundy's relay throw to Mackey was perfect, and Brown was tagged out, attempting a leadoff inside the park home run. Bottom of the sixth, Willie Wells led off with a single and scored on Alex Radcliffe's double down the third baseline to tie the game at 5. Bert Hunter was brought in to relieve his Pittsburgh Crawford teammate Sam Streeter on the mound for the East. But Hunter was rudely welcomed as Mule Suttles drove a double to the opposite field for his third RBI of the game. Leroy Morney's single then brought home Suttles to put the West on top 7-5. Top of the seventh, the top of the East's order went down 1-2-3. Willie Foster was on a roll, recording eight outs since last allowing a hit. Bottom of the seventh, Foster led off with a base hit to center, and East manager Pop Lloyd replaced Hunter on the mound with George Chippy Britt. It was a double switch with Josh Gibson coming in to catch and bat in the pitcher's position, scheduled to lead off the eighth. Then Steel Arm Davis doubled home Stearns and Alex Radcliffe singled Davis, and the West was up 10-5. Top of the eighth, Josh Gibson and pinch hitter Judy Johnson start the inning with back-to-back singles, but they're left stranded as Foster retires the next three hitters. Bottom of the eighth, Sam Bankhead singled to right, then stole second. Josh Gibson's throw sailed into center field, and Bankhead sensationally came all the way around to score the West's 11th run. As Willie Foster takes the mound for the ninth, the West leads the East 11-5. Top of the ninth, last chance for the East. Pitcher Chippy Britt, batting for himself, leads off with a base hit up the middle. Cool Papa Bell hit a ground ball to the unfortunate Leroy Morney, whose wild throw resulted in his third error of the day and put runners on second and third with none out. Rap Dixon crushed a pitch to deep center field. Unfortunately for Rap, it measured .450 to straightaway center at Comiskey Park in 1933. Turkey Stearns ran down the blast to make a fine running catch. Chippy Britt tagged up and scored on the play. Oscar Charleston followed with a sacrifice fly to left. Cool Papa scored, but the East was down to their last out. Josh Gibson flew out to left fielder Walter Steel Arm Davis, and Blackball's first ever dream game was over. For the West, 11 runs on 15 hits and 3 errors. For the East, 7 runs, 7 hits, and 2 errors. The winning pitcher was Willie Foster, the loser Bert Hunter. The official attendance was 19,568, lower than hoped for because of the rain, but still a huge crowd by mid-Depression standards. In fact, the East-West game at Comiskey Park outdrew a Cubs-Phillies doubleheader played at Wrigley Field that same afternoon. The pitching star of the game, obviously, was Willie Foster, who threw a complete game for the West. In fact, all 9 starters for the West went the distance in the contest. The hitting star was Mule Suttles, 2 for 4 with a homer and a double, 2 runs, 3 RBIs. But the real star of the day was Negro League Baseball. Following the game, white sports writer Henry L. Farrell of the Chicago Daily News wrote that several of the black players he saw could slot into Major League Baseball immediately. He singled out Oscar Charleston, Dick Lundy, and Mule Suttles in particular, and also wrote that last place teams like the Cincinnati Reds or Boston Red Sox could do well to replace their current rosters with the entire East team. The East-West game became an annual tradition after that, providing blackball with an annual focal point to the season, providing Negro League teams with revenue that helped them survive the Depression, and proving to a national audience that some of baseball's greatest stars were absent from Major League Baseball. Among my sources, Larry Lester's Black Baseball's National Showcase, A History of the East-West Game, and I don't think I've done a presentation yet that didn't feature a Larry Lester book in the credits. World's Fair imagery came from 81 Stainless YouTube channel and America's Best History.com. Baseball websites used included Agate Type, the Sabres Game Project, and Retro Sheet. The statistics and player portraits came from Seamheads.com, and the clippings were from newspapers.com and the ProQuest Historical Black Newspapers database that Sabre has so generously given me access to. I'd like to thank our collaborators, Lifetime Sports, the Community Cup Classic, P5, the Partnership, and the artist previously known as Little Professor. And special thanks to our most valuable partner, Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. And I'd like to invite all of you to our continued series of Negro League Soul. Next month, Ike is going to be looking at the 75th anniversary of the Major League World Series 1948. In November, the baseball art of yours truly will recap the year in December.